to another episode of X Factor. Thrilled to be joined today by Eric Bluhm, who's the Chief Revenue Officer of private equity-backed Modern Campus. Eric, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Rob. Appreciate you having me here today.
Yep, terrific. And growth is king or queen, and it's always under pressure. So you're in the hot seat at all times, month to month, quarter to quarter, and year, and a lot of lessons learned over your career. So excited to unpack what that looks like, and then more specifically get into the power of 90-day plans, be it you're newly arrived at a company and you want to get off to the best possible start, or you want to look at it as a framework to jumpstart every single quarter, since we only have so many years in these hold periods to create value. So give us a real quick high-level overview of your career journey and how you landed in the CRO seat.
Yeah, certainly, Rob. Thanks. My career journey is probably like fairly similar to a lot of people in my seat. I went through my college days not really knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up, and fell into a sales job, and lo and behold, I turned out to be pretty damn good at it. And so, I was holding a bag for a pretty significant period of time. Transitioned out of a couple different industries, but really landed in tech, which is where I always wanted to be. And, back in those days, like, tech wasn't what it is now, right? But I saw it as the wave of the future. And so I really wanted to kind of nest myself into a tech career. And so I found a smaller, privately owned company that was going to give me my first shot at being an account executive from a tech standpoint. What was interesting, though, was that company, 30 days after I was hired, was acquired by private equity. And it was acquired by Vista, which is obviously a very well-known, very large, PE operator.
Yep.
And at that time, to be totally honest with you, Rob, I didn't know anything about private equity. I really didn't. But I got a great opportunity through them to go through a leadership development program that was a year-long, kind of like master's degree, if you will, on being an operator inside of a PE-based tech company. And that really kind of launched my career, because very, very rapidly, I started getting a lot of opportunities to grow within that business, taking on more and more responsibility, and, kind of going through the sales channel of being like a regional manager, and then kind of being a director and a VP level. And, over the course of time, I got an opportunity within that business. I was with that business for 2 bites of the apple. 2 different PE firms kind of bought and sold us over that time. And I learned a lot, got a lot of opportunity. And the best thing was, I was surrounded by really smart people. Both the PE firm was very hands-on, and I learned a lot. I was always very hungry for their knowledge, because I wasn't going back to get a master's degree, but I still had an appetite for education. And additionally, the other leaders in the business were very, very smart, both, about how they went about their business from a business standpoint, but also how they created culture. So I took a lot of mental notes. There was a time, though, where I had an opportunity to really kind of spread my wings and take that step from like running the entire sales organization that at that time was probably about 125 sellers, neighborhood of 9 to 10 regional managers, a big organization, and take that step to being a chief revenue officer versus kind of the sales leader, if you will. And, that's a decision that everybody has to make at the end of the day. It's not for everybody, but it's one that I wanted to make, because I was not comfortable staying where I was from a career standpoint, even though it's a great company. And so I got that opportunity. And so, I was with that business for about 18 months. And, that was another PE-backed software company. And after about 18 months, we did a transaction. We sold to a strategic buyer. That strategic buyer had different visions of the company. They were the larger company. We were being folded in. and really made a very quick decision to exit that company and take on another challenge, which brought me here to Modern Campus, which is really my second stint as a chief revenue officer and allows me to really apply what I'm passionate about, but also apply some lessons that I learned along the way.
Yeah, sounds great. So you didn't seek out private equity, it sort of absorbed you and then it got in your blood and you've stayed ever since. What's the most rewarding thing about these PE-backed deals and the most challenging thing?
Well, I mean, the rewarding part of it is, I mean, everybody's built a little bit different, everyone's wired a little bit different. Some people complain about the pressure and stress. I actually thrive in it, right? So like I've had times where I've kind of like stepped away for kind of a mental reset or if you will, and with the intention of that lasting a couple months, and after a couple weeks, I'm just going stir crazy, right? So like for whatever reason, I'm built for this at the end of the day. And I just really enjoy it. And it's not really about pressure, it's really about staying mentally sharp because I really enjoy the fact that, working in this type of environment, there's a constant sense of evolvement, evolution that can happen on a daily basis. And I just really like keeping my mind sharp and keeping my hands busy. Some of the biggest frustrations with it is that, every yield curve doesn't go up and to the right like you want it to, right? It's not like a mutual fund with a
Mhm.
4% steady return where the yield curve's constantly up and to the right, but there's pitfalls along the way, and there's humbling moments, and there's moments of great joy and everything in between. Everybody wants everything to run like a machine, but the reality is operating a business, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with economies, you're dealing with sales cycles, people live their lives and so on and so forth, both your customers and your employees. And it's never the steady pace that everybody wants it to be. And so you got to be emotionally strong to like pull through that, but to really pull your teams through that in the right way that doesn't create angst and anxiety, but creates excitement and you know, momentum.
Yeah, I try to think of it like stress is a reaction to stimulus. The stimulus itself has no real particular meaning other than what we as humans decide to internalize it as. And when you internalize it as stress, and that goes into how you engage with your team, they care about company performance, but they're not too focused on MOIC and cash on cash returns. They are worried about their W-2 and in their own careers. So it's a delicate balance for sure. So anyway, in PE, among other things, it's about transforming companies. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it's at the forefront of every investment thesis. We want to make these companies 5 years later almost seem unrecognizable through professionalization and transformation. But what does it mean to you when you think about total transformation and the way that you leave a company at the end of a hold period versus what you found?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. And my mindset is always make it world class, right? And so everything that I try to do when I get into something, and whether this be a 3 to 5 year hold period, whether this be the quarter that we're in, right? What can we do to evolve the world class? And really understanding what world class looks like and be aspirational to those goals and bring people along for that journey. Will you make it? Hopefully. But even if you get close, you're significantly better than where you started. And so there's a lot of different avenues that goes into, a lot of different departments, a lot of different workflows, a lot of different things to think about. But it's really the concept of like, how do we take this and make it a world-class organization? I always tell people, you know, 3, 5 years from now, a year from now, whatever the time horizon is, how do we make this a destination place that people want to come work? Where we don't fundamentally even need recruiters to be, banging on doors. We have people coming to us
Mhm.
because they know that this is a world-class place to work, to grow, develop, and be successful.
Yeah, outstanding. So when you think about doing that, of course, you've got your own go-to-market scope, but you're also doing it as part of a broader executive team. what are some of the keyword descriptors that come to mind when you think about teams that are well built to drive this transformation together? What do they have in common?
Well, first and foremost is trust, right? I mean, I'd say the number one thing to develop at every company is trust, right? And just realize nobody's going to be perfect, yourself included, but you got to build trust. If we're back channeling and looking over each other's shoulders or not trusting that a high quality level of work is getting done, it just leads to a lot of issues throughout the business. And that's typically when, you got to make sure you have your wolf pack and make sure you got the right people on board for the journey ahead and not necessarily, you know, holding on to too much history for the journey behind you. So it's really trust. And with trust, you can break down silos. And that's really, really important. A company should not be organized into silos where all the meetings and conversations happen and then the silo of the department. They really need to be cross-departmental. And some of them can be with the people that are executing the day-to-day job, and some of it's with leadership. But we really have to understand that, you know, a lot of people, one of the things that I've recognized over the years is that sales is an area that gets all the recognition, but they also get all the blame. But the reality is, typically the output from sales is the net result of the activities of a lot of different departments within the company. And so we have to understand across the business, where do we have to go as a company? What are the areas of strength and weaknesses, and how do we evolve to be stronger across the board, which will drive better revenue results in the future?
Mhm. You got to stick together because you all have this shared objective of getting to a finish line liquidity event. And the bigger that pie, the more everyone benefits. And to your point of silos, I mean, there's just no time for these cliches of, for example, finance versus sales. I mean, on that front, look at Rev Ops. It's sort of right in the middle of all the key metrics that drive a company. Obviously, it's a commercial thing, but you can't do it alone, and you got to embrace your colleagues for their assistance and to return that favor as well. So I hear you.
Yeah,
Um,
and one of the things I want to touch on real quick though, too,
yeah,
Rob, is like I think one of the things that I've observed that the best leaders or operators in a PE space, doesn't matter what department it is, versus ones that tend to struggle, is the concept of what is the focus for them and what is the focus for the business and not get them mixed up, right? The vast majority of the employees are fearful of a change of control. Fearful, because that's when people lose jobs. That's when there's a J curve to productivity. That's when there's uneasiness, like it affects their personal lives. It can affect their professional lives. But yet, a lot of times the C-suite of this company, many times, I'm not gonna say that's all they focus on, but they're overly focused on it. And that's really a key differentiator, that you have to separate yourself mentally from that PE transaction side of the business, as far as how you relate to people and how you manage people and how you motivate people. The vast majority of people in the business should never even know that you're a PE-backed company. But I see people way too often either framing things as the why we're doing certain things is because the PE company demands it, the PE company wants it, blah, blah, blah. And then people are really in the wrong headspace,
yeah, I can
about their
picture a couple
issues.
sales reps grabbing a beer at the end of the week at happy hour and asking each other, why do we care what our owner thinks? I'm trying to get paid.
Right, exactly. That's spot on. And, quite honestly, they shouldn't even really know that that relationship exists. If they do, if they have too much information there, something's gone wrong.
Yeah, so great segue into another area I wanted to get into. So managing up to the private equity firm is totally different than working across your C-suite and totally distinct from managing down. So how do you go about taking the realities of an investment thesis mandate and translating that into a downstream vision that people can feel good about?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rob. And I'm going to try to give a thoughtful answer. You know, obvious, first of all, the PE partner is exactly that. They're your partner, right? And so they need to be, you need to be totally aligned with them, that you need to ask for help. You need to build trust with them too, that you're the right person to lead the business, but you have to be, intellectually curious, but also rooted in the data and the thesis of where we're trying to go. But the realization is that we're not just pointing to numbers and it's growth at all costs to get there, regardless of how we do it. There really has to be an underlying strategy, but the strategy has to be yours, right? That you're owning, that the C-suite is owning. It's not a strategy that's owned by the PE firm when you're communicating it down. And so, if you just go on the basic premise of what everybody gets up for and works every day, what is it? It's really two things: personal growth, right? Am I acquiring new skills? Am I learning new things? Is my value to the world going to be greater in the future than it is today?
Mhm.
And then obviously the compensation piece, and it's not necessarily for everybody that they're pushing to an elite level of compensation, but they want to make sure that they're financially in what they're doing. When you're talking about a revenue organization, that's typically going to be based on OTEs or some sort of variable compensation. So what do we want? We want a company that embraces who we are. We want a company that allows us to grow and get new skills so that we hold more value in the world. And we want to be financially stable and hit our targets and make sure that we feel good that we're getting compensated for the work that we're putting in. And so with that said, when you're communicating down and you think about these things, we need to really make sure that we're framing the why the appropriate way, right? We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to earn what they anticipate. We want to make sure that we're a company that's growing and not shrinking, right? A successful financial company has more opportunity for everybody because as the company grows, the number of people in that company grow. And as that grows, we need more leadership and more structure and so on and so forth. And as we evolve, we're going to do cool modern things that will take some education from people to be able to operate. And that will create new skills that you can either use to advance your career here or, potentially at another organization. But whenever we're setting out on a tactic, we want to frame why it's important that we're doing this. And it's all based on growth, because growth leads to all those opportunities and the core tenets of why people are getting out of bed every day.
Mhm. Yeah, no doubt about it. So, sort of, there's a lot of how about the way that these things can get done. But as we previewed at the opening, the 90-day plan, which for those that are newer to private equity is near and dear to every investor's heart, and that's how they think about the world. Because if you don't get off to a absolute blistering start, you've kind of blunted your potential upside. So just give us a sense of how you think about 90-day plans, the context of maybe not just when you newly join a company, but quarter over quarter, and then we'll kind of unpack from there.
Yeah, I think the concept of a 90-day plan is a little bit different when you're new to an organization versus if you're nested in that organization for a couple of years and you feel like you gotta get out the jumper cables and kind of kickstart something, right? But it's a concept of a plan, right? And the plan is extremely important because it's not only about having a plan, but it's executing on the plan and then holding yourself accountable to the outcomes of what that plan was. And through that, you build a tremendous amount of trust up to the PE firm and the operators, and also across the C-suite. I've seen a lot of people that have great plans and poor execution, and then therefore they hide from quantifying what actually occurred as a result of the execution of that plan. And that's where trust is broken down. A lot of people are rushing to have plans ahead of the board meeting or whatever it is, but they don't really follow through. But that the follow through and the execution is where trust is built. And trust is the most important thing for yourself as an individual up to a PE firm, as well as, across your peers within the business. So with that said, I think when you start a new business, like if we're just hired as a new CRO or a new executive within the business, it's really, really important to observe and really inspect for a solid 30 days, because a lot of people come in with a lot of based on their previous life. But the reality is, while a lot of SaaS companies operate very similar, the needs of the business are very, very different, especially across different industries. Maybe if you have a little bit of point of view because you're staying within the industry with a new company, it might be a little bit different, but you have to observe. In observing, that's talking to as many people as possible, building relationships with people, asking questions. Don't tell, ask, right? Jot down your notes, look for themes, inspect the sales process, inspect the top of funnel process, inspect the implementation process, talk to customers, get their feedback, real feedback, document it, don't share it yet. But what you're doing is you're gathering a point of view about where are we strong as we sit right now, and what are some areas of opportunity. The number one thing to look at immediately upon arrival is data, right? And yeah, of course, looking at the nuanced data to find out, things like what are our win rate and what is our top of funnel metrics and how many leads do we need to get this amount of pipeline and what's our conversion percentage, all the KPI stuff that I assume people are aware of. But what you really want to test for is how strong is the data model at this company, right? Because poor data produces poor insights and can produce a poor strategy. So I think one of the number one things to do is to figure out how strong is the data collection process and how strong are our reports coming out of that data. And that might be the very first thing that you look to improve, because you as a leader can't make fundamental decisions to improve a business until you have strength and conviction in the underlying data to be able to make those decisions. So I think that is absolutely huge and the first thing to always inspect. I mean, as an example, you might come into a company that's 30 to $50 million of ARR that was a collection of a bunch of different acquisitions. They all had a different process of how they collected data. Somebody took all that data and jammed it into a single database, and now you're trying to roll it up and try to make some business decisions off that data. That's not clean data, right? Everybody did it different. So there can be a process right away of like, what is going to be our operational rhythm about the data we're collecting, why we're collecting that data, what it's going to look like, the consistency to it, so that we can start painting a clearer picture and telling a better story. So anyway, long story short, first 30 days, inspect, right? Inspect heavily, inspect the people, and you're going to start to identify like, who are the people that seem to have the right mindset, people I think I can trust, right? Who are the people I'm a little bit skeptical about, either about their motivations or their attitudes towards the business. Who are people that are being overly defensive? Like, who are the people that are being very transparent? Inspecting the data like I talked about, but overall inspection, and then bouncing that off, the customers and everything else. A big thing to inspect is obviously the customer journey. How do leads come in top of funnel? How are those handled and nurtured? How are those moved over into a sales process? What does that sales process look like? How does that move over to implementation? What does that implementation process look like? What's the feedback of those areas? Where are the log jams? Where are the conversion percentages not meeting your mentality of what you think best in class looks like and why? And lastly, another thing to really inspect is the underlying systems. And I'm fairly big on this, but like there's a lot of amazing technologies in this world. There's a lot of systems that companies use for different purposes. Most companies have gaps in those systems. Most companies have done a lightweight job of integrating those systems. And a lot of people don't have a philosophy of why they've bought what they've bought. They just have a collection of that they've stacked up. And I think really having a keen point of view on what good looks like, what is best in class, and preparing a thesis for revolutionizing a tech stack against it is important. So anyway, first 30 days, inspect, ask questions, don't be too opinionated. This isn't a time to brag about your past experiences. It's not a time to tell people what they should be doing, this, that, and the other. But I do think the one thing that is important is to set up an operational rhythm, right? A lot of teams lack structure around their operational rhythm. As a leader, you shouldn't have one-on-ones scattered on your calendar 5 days a week, taking up all your time. You should be boxing out. You have strategic time, you have team meetings, you have one-on-ones, and you free your calendar. You should be projecting to people, this is what your calendar should look like, and this is what your operational rhythm should look like, all the way down to the individual contributors and basically helping them manage their calendar, which frees up a lot of capacity and time to do strategic things that move the needle and have people not get stuck into a rhythm around internal meetings of which things get delayed and we don't spend enough time in the field. So
So,
the next,
go
yep, go
ahead.
ahead, Rob.
So that kind of general assessment and evaluation and inspection that can give rise to a clear path of what do we have here that's great that we want to strengthen, where are our gaps and weaknesses. So in addition though to a cadence, what do you want to get done and have in place at the end of the 90 days? Because as you know, it can't be just a learning journey. So
Yeah.
what can you feel good about? Hey, it's the 90-day mark. Here are some changes that I've already made, not just being in inspection mode.
Yeah, well, I was kind of talking more about the first 30 days, right? And then you kind of move into kind of a readout phase, if you will, right? And that readout can be to the private equity team of basically saying, here's what I've observed and here's what I've found. It could also be to the senior leadership team. But the most important thing is really communicating that down to the individuals. And this is where you start gaining that trust. Because the reality is, while you might expose some things, the reality is that most people are pretty damn intelligent and they already know these things. So the fact that you found them, unearthed them, and are saying that you want to change and improve them is typically where people start nodding their heads and going, okay, I like this, right? And so I definitely think, you have to have a lot of confidence because you're going to call things out that people feel pride or ownership for because they've been part of the journey to get to this point, but framing it in what does world class look like and how do we go from where we are today to get to there? There's a series of steps and events, and these are the things that I want to take on,
Mhm.
right? And so kind of reading out to people, these are acknowledging these are some things that are going really, really well. And here's some areas that I see some, short-term improvements and some long-term projects. But framing in, this is where we ultimately want to go. This is what world class looks like. And we're going to get there, but it's going to be a dial and not a switch. And we're going to evolve over time. And then really kind of doing that initial readout. But then the important thing that a lot of people miss is immediately taking action on what is the strategy for evolution. And to me, it's all about work streams and project plans. And so if you're talking to your direct reports, you can't pile everything on one person, right? You as an individual, you can't take everything on as well. You have to delegate and have people have ownership of these work streams. So if it's something like a tech stack related work stream where you want to evolve your tech stack, you lean on somebody in your RevOps department. If it's a sales process or a pitch deck or overcoming objections or sales enablement, you lean on specific sales leaders. But the point is, You figure out who would take pride in that project and assign them the owner of a work stream. And then that work stream, we build a checklist with gate checks and dates, and we inspect the problem. We take a look at potential solutions, right? We actually create those solutions, then we implement those solutions, we test that they're working, and then we iterate. We never promise we're going to get it right immediately 100%, right? But we always anticipate that we're going to get better. But you tweak, the project's really never fully done. You're constantly inspecting that, but now you have somebody who's owning that work stream and takes pride in the project. And you tell that person, hey, if you're in an interview in the future for my seat, a CRO role at a future company, you can talk about how you transform this part of the business, led the work stream, did the organization, implemented results, tweak the model for better performance in the future. And so that's really important thing is that like once you've observed, let's start actioning. And then really understanding like what are the KPIs that we're driving towards and what are the leading indicators that they're working, and then really tracking that data. Now, whether that be through creating reports or having a team responsible for it, or really working on an enablement strategy with the individual contributors on how we are going to input the data so that we can track it. It's really important that we get that tracking. And then when we're in our senior leadership meetings, when we're talking about with SLT, we're talking to the PE firm, we can basically say, here's the thesis we had, here's the things we set out to do, here's the strategy that we use to execute against them, and here's how that's tracking, and is it working or not? And holding yourself accountable builds trust with everybody in the organization. And once you start executing on things, you don't have people looking over your shoulder and questioning what they're doing, but they're coming to you and saying, what's next? Or they're coming to you and saying, I have this problem. Can you help me with it? Right. And that's what you get joy and gratification of saying, I have a repeatable model that works that other people are tapping into. And if we're doing this across the organization, you'd be shocked at how quickly we can rise the tide across the entire organization and improve and get to that world-class model in that 3 to 5 year period.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I guess last topic here, let's take that 90-day concept and apply it to the jumper cable scenario where maybe you've been around for a couple years and maybe through no fault of your own, maybe it's end market softness or some other kind of external factor. We've seen more headwinds than we'd like. So we don't necessarily need to go on the full discovery journey again of a traditional 90-day plan, but is there an idea or two of a mid-hold period 90-day plan that you found can be particularly helpful at getting an additional spark into momentum?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I've had those points in my career too, where I'm like, hey, we're operating efficiently, doing well, but man, there's just another level out there that I don't think we're quite getting to, right? Sometimes it's a motivation factor. I mean, people are human, right? They're on the treadmill doing it every single day. And, we're tracking the data and things are going well. And, sometimes it can be fatigue, boredom, so on and so forth. So, sometimes it's a challenge, a spiff, a contest, something fun. It's one of the things that I think sometimes PE world gets lost is the fun factor for the individual contributors. And I think it's the leader's responsibility to create joy and fun and laughter, right? Friendships between the peers. And so that's always kind of an easy one. Of course, it takes a little bit of budget. There's a lot of fun things you can do, but you got to make sure it's actually fun for them and rewarding for them and not necessarily just checking the box. But from the other standpoint, I mean, as an executive in a company, I'm sure you're standing over the data and you know it like the back of your hand. I mean, you should be looking at data literally every single day, and you should know over time, if we're talking 2 years in, you should know the areas and the KPIs that we're excelling at. And you should also know some points of weakness, right? I think the data will always tell the story of what your next project is.
Yeah, I
And
think
how to do it. it'll be a little different, but the story is always there if you're looking.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say, tying a few points you've made together, along with some feedback I get regularly from private equity sponsors when we're doing searches for them, is that, okay, you have a leadership ethos that includes let's be world class. And so that, as you pointed out, is a dial, not a switch. It's a journey that you will never reach its destination. You're always trying to close the gap. And so as the quarters go by, and they do go by quickly, kind of using that 90-day framework to reevaluate, okay, what do I want to see done in this next quarter on that journey? Because I think the private equity sponsors that get most excited about their executives are in among a host of other traits is when that individual is even more dialed into the business this quarter than they were last versus, hey, I've developed my reporting package. Here's the same stuff every quarter. We'll just keep grinding, because they're obsessed with curiosity and understanding businesses. And I think they want the same from execs. And I'm thinking your roadmap of getting to world class, as long as we're measuring ourselves quarter by quarter and leveraging some 90-day objectives, could be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and like I said, there's always a project. There's always a project. There's always something that can be better. There's always something that's trailing the world-class level. Um, but I think part of it too, though, Rob, is like you certainly don't want to take on 100 projects at once because you'll do a half-assed job on all of them, right? And you won't be able to track them, and you're going to burn a lot of people out and frustrate a lot of people. There's a operational rhythm about how different projects kind of stack on top of each other over time, and you got to be a little bit cognizant of that. Um, and sometimes the project isn't necessarily in your department. Sometimes it's working cross-departmentally with other departments on some projects that they have or that they should be undergoing that would be a benefit to the broader organization. And then reporting back to other people and saying, these are some things that we're working on. This is why we're working on them. This is the output that we expect as a result of that. And this is how it's going to benefit you long term. So I would be floored if anybody could show me a set of data and operational rhythm that you can't find some significant move the needle projects in. But as a leader, like if you feel you're ever going to get to this Shangri-La point where you can just kick your feet up and the machine operates, right? You need to find a new career. The reality is that you always have to be paranoid about the next day, the next month, the next quarter. You always need to be paranoid about the operational rhythm of the organization. And you always have to be paranoid that you're not really achieving that next level of world-class execution. And so you're always inspecting and looking for the next project. I really like delegating, on a quarterly basis, like when we're setting up and say, what's the plan for the quarter? Of course, we have our KPIs as a team and as individuals and so on and so forth. Those are usually set in stone with the budget at the beginning of the year. They don't move. What can move though is what are the projects that we're working on? How are we spending our free time, right? What are you owning above and beyond that? That's helping the company move forward. Those are the things I like to be very prescriptive on and make sure people are bought into, like, this is a great project for me. It's something I want to own. It's something I see as a deficiency and I want to get better. But really making sure on a quarterly basis, we define that and the scope of the project isn't too small, but it's also not too big that it can't be executed on within a 90-day time frame.
Well, if your average hold period is 5 years, that's a precious few 20 90-day intervals, and progress has to be relentless and ongoing. And to your point, not only can you never let your guard down, you've got to continuously improve yourself throughout the whole period. So great insights. I know our listeners are swimming in ideas and takeaways here. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us. And if you don't mind, let's have you back down the road to explore another issue.
Thoughtful discussion today, Rob.
Okay, awesome, man. Thank you.